Shalom, everyone. Thanks for joining me today in another episode of Yasplain, where we like to let our fingers do the walking and the scriptures do the talking. Today I want to look at a verse here in Matthew chapter 27 regarding the tombs coming up at the crucifixion, the tombs being opened at the crucifixion of the Messiah. I think most people are familiar with this account in Matthew chapter 27, and I'm going to contend that this section of scripture has been added to our Bibles, that it should not be there. It does not have any legitimate reason for being there. Now, I want to express that this is my personal opinion. I do not have any resources or any other studies that validate my claim here, but I think if we build upon scripture in context, we will see that there's something missing about this section of scripture. Maybe there's other sections of scripture that are missing and we don't have the full context of it. But I feel that this probably should not even be in our Bibles. So what we're talking about here is in Matthew chapter 27. This is where the Messiah, he's up on the cross, right? He's up on the stake and he's giving up his last breath. Right here in verse 45 it says, "Now in the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. And about the 9th hour Yahushua cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." That is to say, Eli, Eli, why have you forsaken me? So we scroll down here to this section, verse 49. Right here, verse 49, it says, "The rest said, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. Yahushua, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up his ruach. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in two from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent, and the graves were opened. And many bodies of the Kodashim, the saints, which slept, arose." Verse 53, "And came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. Now when the centurion and they that were with him were watching Yahushua saw the earthquake and those things that were done, they feared greatly, saying, Truly this was the Son of Elohim." So this is my contention here, is we have the Messiah, he's on the cross, he's given up his last breath, he's dying. It says the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom, and then there was an earthquake. The rocks rent. They were torn too, right? And then it says, and the graves were opened, so he's still on the cross. It says, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose. And it says that they came out of the grave after his resurrection. So that should be a huge red flag for us, just reading this coherently, that it says these graves were opened and the saints came out of their graves, of the tombs, after his resurrection. Well, he wasn't resurrected until 3 days and 3 nights later. So you can see where it doesn't really flow in the text of saying that he's on the cross, he dies, there's an earthquake, the tombs are opened, and they go out into the holy city. It says that they go out into the holy city and they're come out of the graves after his resurrection. So this just doesn't make sense in the whole flow of things. And then it just goes back into talking about the centurion that was watching him. So he's on the grave, the temple is rent in two from top to bottom, there's an earthquake, rocks are rent, and then this is almost, it's either parenthetical or it's just an insertion that shouldn't even be there, just because it doesn't make any sense that flow would just jump onto talking about after his resurrection 3 days later while he's still on the cross, and then goes back to him being on the cross. So that's one of the reasons why I think this verse probably doesn't have any right being in the scriptures, because it doesn't make sense. It's not very coherent. Another reason is there's no other witnesses for this account. It's not written in any of the other Gospels. None of the disciples talk about it. Paul doesn't talk about it. No one else, there's no other accounts of this happening. No one, you'd think if, a bunch of people got up out of the grave and went throughout the city, there would be lots of writings about that. Somebody would mention something, at least. And maybe if there is some other hidden, books that we don't know about, maybe. But to me, it seems a little bit fishy for this verse to be in the scripture. Another thing is, too, the third thing why I think this is an addition to our Bibles is because it contradicts the rest of scripture. And look what I mean. Let's look at what it talks about in regards to the saints being resurrected. And 1 Corinthians chapter 15:23 says, "But every man in his own order. The Mashiach first is the first fruits." The Mashiach is the first fruits. Afterward, they that are Mashiach's at his coming. So Matthew says that people were raised up after his resurrection, but Paul's saying it's here afterward, after the Mashiach's coming. So this actually flows with the rest of Scripture, with John and Peter as well. Another verse here talking about this is 1 Thessalonians 2:19. Let's look at that. "For what is our hope, or joy, or crown of rejoicing? Are not even ye in the presence of our Adonai, Yahushua HaMashiach, at his coming?" So that's when the resurrection takes place, at his coming. Paul in Philippians 3:11, I believe it is, he says, "I would that I could partake in the resurrection." 1 Corinthians 15 is all about the resurrection. In the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, those who are still alive will see those who have slept raised from the grave, and then they will go to meet them in the air. That's going to be the first resurrection. It's not when the Messiah, 3 days after he was crucified and resurrected, saints didn't pop up and to be with him. We also see this in 1 John 2:28. Let's take a look at that. John, another witness. "And now, little children, abide in him, that when he shall appear, we may have confidence and not be ashamed before him at his coming." So that's when it's going to take place, is at his coming. Doesn't say anything about that, people being resurrected before his coming. It's not in there. Let's look at Peter and see what he says. Peter, verse 7, chapter 1, 1 Peter, "That the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perishes, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Yahushua HaMashiach, whom having not seen ye love, in whom, though we now see him not, yet believing, ye rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory." So there we are again. It's at the appearing. That's when it's going to happen. So again, we have no other witnesses for this section in Matthew chapter 27 that any saints were resurrected. It's incoherent. It's out of the flow of the context of Scripture, and it contradicts a multitude of other scriptures. So this is why I believe that this is added to our Bibles and should not be in there. But if you have any insight, if you have anything that maybe I don't know or understand, please by all means share that with me. What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? I'd love to hear and read your thoughts. Leave them in the comments. We love you. Shalom.